Okay, I sent out an email yesterday. Uh, so those of you who have received that email, you know that I've been I've been ill the entire week here with the flu. So I've been in bed for the entire week, and although it is getting better, I am still. mm, I'm still not really fresh yet. But anyway, I am here. Okay, my intention is that I will make a talk, and feel free to ask a question or comment or anything on the chat. But I will not be looking at the chat for a while. I will I will come back to the questions if there are any later later in this live stream. Um, so that's basically how I intend to do this. Okay. So what is happening here? What is being shared here is not aimed at the conditioned mind. The conditioned mind will find this boring. Because there is nothing here that the conditioned mind really can use. And that is what the conditioned mind is always scanning for. It is always scanning for something that it can use. But what is shared here has nothing to do with anything that can be used. Another thing is that, and this might come as a surprise to many, that what is being shared here has nothing to do with spirituality. Spirituality is something that the conditioned mind has invented. So, what is happening here is actually an evolutionary impulse. It is something that has to do with life itself. What we call awakening, and mind you, awakening is also just a concept, but it can be a useful concept to point towards something that happens as an evolutionary impulse. Existence is constantly evolving. It is constantly transforming into something else. It is the dance of the forms. And that is actually what is going on here. So when we use the term awakening, it points towards a possibility, a leap, an evolutionary leap. And the miraculous thing is that this evolutionary leap can take place in the human being as the human being. So when we talk about awakening, it sounds like something is, something must be, yeah, let's just call it a dream state, sleepwalking, in a trance, hypnotized. And again, all of those words, they are just concepts. But again, they point towards something. They point towards the conditioned mind. And we are all conditioned. When a human being is born, it automatically has some conditioning on the cellular level, or what, where it is stored. I cannot say. But that conditioning is when you recognize that you behave or act like one of your parents, for instance. Then there is another kind of conditioning. That conditioning is programmed into every human being during upbringing. And that conditioning is very much influenced by the culture that you happen to appear within. So that culture keeps on programming itself into new human beings. And as such, there is not anything wrong about that as such. If only we knew that that was what we were doing, and that that was what was happening. And if only we knew that there is something else underneath the conditioning, so to speak. So there is an intelligence, and that's not an intelligence that you have. It's an intelligence that you are. An aspect of the intelligence that is orchestrating the entire universe. And you are it. Sometimes I hear people say that we need the human ego to function. That's not true. That's the human ego speaking. Of course, there is a lot of the conditioning that has practical value, and all of that is fine. But a huge part of the conditioning that we are being programmed with has to do with identity. And that is where the problems, the difficulties, the suffering, the unnecessary suffering, that is where it comes from. This programmed identity that nobody tells us is just a surface, a social identity, a mask that we are carrying. And it's not done in any bad spirit. It's simply just because that it is so widespread that no one questions it. Well, except me, and not only me. There is a lot of human beings that are starting to question this for good reasons. Not knowing who you are is painful. Will always end up being painful. So that's basically what awakening is. It is that intelligence that you already are that suddenly recognizes itself, that suddenly sees very clearly that I have been lost in a dream world. I've been lost in a mind-made story, about who I thought I was. The conditioning of the false identity is a huge limitation of the intelligence that you are. There is actually not really anything that you can actively do to wake up. And that's important to realize, because everything that you try to do will be the conditioning that you are carrying right now. But then again, on the other hand, that does not mean that, and I know this sounds paradoxically, but it does not mean that there is nothing that you can do. But what you can do is not really a doing. You can expose yourself to truth. You can cultivate an appetite for truth. Truth is the fire in which the conditioned false identity burns away within. I know that sounds dramatic. It sounds dramatically. And sometimes it actually is. Another interesting thing is that you don't have to believe in what I'm saying to wake up. You can actually disagree with me totally and still wake up. And the reason for that is that that which disagrees is the conditioned self, and it is not the conditioned self that wakes up. So how do we recognize ourselves, our true identity? Well, we have to become silent. We have to become still. And yes, the mind might chat and talk, essentially talk constantly. But that's just the conditioning. Don't fight it. Watch it. Let's do it right now. Just close your eyes and sit in stillness. And observe, not analyze, just simply observe. And by that, I do not mean observing visually, and I do not mean observing if there are any sounds around you. Broaden your observations, broaden it from being focused to being more like boundless, to be more like fully open, just like we are opening up the aperture. And notice that the observing itself is not focused. It is more like all pervasive. The observing is not a particular place. The observing has more a quality of presence. Stay as that presence for this moment. There is not a someone who is present. Presence is present. Awareness is aware. Consciousness is conscious. The cosmic intelligence is observing as you. On this physical level, we are life itself, manifested as a human being, capable of awakening to our true nature as the entire universe that has manifested itself at this moment in this temporary human form. But we are not limited to this form. And we do not share the limitations of this form. But when that is said, we still have to honor the human being, the physical form. And we cannot use spirituality to try and escape being a human being. It will not work. And in the end, it will lead to even more suffering. What is called for instead is to understand clearly what it means to be a human being, to understand clearly what it is that is going on. And that understanding, that will come together with the awakening. That is wisdom, insight, clear seeing. No more running away. It is it is important to realize or to understand that awakening is not only about bliss, joy, and happiness. Awakening is all about wanting truth. And then the mind says, what is truth? Well, truth must be something that cannot be destroyed. Something that is impossible to escape. What could that be? So, what is the conditioned mind almost always trying to escape from? Well, the conditioned mind usually seeks something else than what is. That is actually the unnecessary suffering that arises out of this impulse to try and find something to better myself with. Because what is not sufficient to the conditioned self. And that gives us a hint, because the conditioned self is creating a lot of unnecessary suffering because it is trying to escape truth. So during this week where I was in bed and my body was doing exactly what it is supposed to do, my immune system was fighting the virus and I was miserable. The conditioned mind will try all the tricks in the book to try and escape that situation. But what is happening is exactly what is supposed to be happening. The intelligence of the body, keeping this body alive. So, in that sense, you can say that there was suffering, yes, but that suffering was not unnecessary suffering. I will call it unavoidable suffering. And at that moment, that suffering was truth. But in that exact moment when the conditioned mind then feels pity for itself and it starts to complain, in that moment, unnecessary suffering arises. So, my point here is it is impossible to escape suffering. As human beings, we will, from time to time, have to live through suffering. If we try to escape all kinds of suffering, then we will create unnecessary suffering on top of the old of on top of the other kind of suffering. And the strange thing is that that is exactly what the conditioned mind does. And then the conditioned mind blames life. The worst kind of suffering is trying to escape suffering. And that sounds weird, I know that. But the reason for that is that if we try to escape any kind of suffering, if we try to convince ourselves that life is possible without suffering, then what we are really talking about is death, a dead life, non existence. Suffering is not a problem. Unnecessary suffering contains a lot of problems. As we awaken, we see what I've just been talking about very, very clearly. And the struggle against truth, the fighting against reality, falls away. We can also call that surrendering or allowing. I don't really know about this allowing thing because what is happening is already happening. So we don't have to allow it. But anyway, and then when we wake up, when the intelligence wakes up, the cosmic intelligence, that intelligence sees itself as everything. And you might wonder what that feels like or look like. So if you imagine a cat in front of a mirror, that cat does not recognize itself. The cat does not look into the mirror and say, "Ah, there I am, the cat." Then we have the human being. The conditioned human being looks into a mirror and say, "Ah, there I am." And of course, there is a huge difference from the animal to the human being that are able to recognize itself as a particular human being. But then when we awaken, I don't need a mirror to see myself. No matter where I look, all that I see is myself. Not as a reflection of this human being, but quite literally. The intelligence sees itself playing out as everything else. And that intelligence knows that it is not limited and it does not share the limitations of the physical body. So when this physical body, for instance, die, the intelligence does not die. It lives on. But the story, the conditioned story that this human being is carrying, that dies with this human being. But that's not a problem, because I'm not that. That's just a social mask that are being worn here for practical purposes. So let's one more time just simply do the observation in silence. Just watch. Observe the human body. But not as a spotlight. Observe it as a floodlight. That awareness, which is saturated with intelligence, is what you are in your essence. And then the mind might say, well, it does not feel like that. The mind does not know anything about that. Being that awareness, being that intelligence, feels like it feels right now. This silent watching. Miraculous. the most miraculous in the entire universe, more miraculous than galaxies or the born of new stars or black holes or dark matter or anything. That awareness is what makes the entire universe come to life. And you are it. Rest as that for a moment. So, thank you for being with me. I will be back next Sunday at the same time. There seems not to be any questions, and that's fine. But if there are questions, you can also save them for next Sunday. Thank you so much for being with me, wherever you are. My friend, I consider you all to be my friend. Thank you.